Also, so I am a breast cancer researcher, but I'm a co-survivor of my father who had colorectal cancer. He is a 5-year survivor now. And my mother-in-law has had breast cancer twice. And so, we have, unfortunately, have had a lot of family members have cancer, but I have been at KU. So I earned my PhD at the University of Kansas over in Lawrence. And then I did my first postdoc at the H. Lee Moffitt Cancer Center in Tampa, Florida. And I was doing a cancer immunology postdoc project, but I wanted to come back to Kansas City and start my family. And so I have been working with Dr. Roy Jensen for almost 16 and a half years now. Started as a postdoc and I've stayed on as faculty. So I have submitted a lot of grants over the years. You kind of live and die by grants in the academic world. And part of what's required is this NIH Biosketch. So I teach a couple of different courses on this. I work with faculty, I work with trainees, graduate students, med students to generate biosketches. I have not ever worked with a group of patient advocates, so I appreciate you guys expanding my brain here a little bit around biosketches. And this is going to be a working presentation, so feel free to interrupt, put questions in the chat. I'll try to watch. Or Sarah, if you see there's questions in the chat and I can answer them, please feel free to interrupt me. I think it's great what you guys all do and using your experiences. And as a basic scientist myself, I know how important it is to listen to you all's voice and feedback and integrate you into our research, because you definitely have a different perspective as opposed to someone who's just been trained in the laboratory. So, okay, so what are we going to learn today? You're going to learn what an NIH Biosketch is and why you need one, all the different parts of a biosketch and how to create one. And then I have resources, links embedded in the presentation, and then also a few at the end that will help you when you're creating your biosketch, just for a little more information if you need it. Okay, so what is a biosketch? So it's short for biographical sketch. So all National Institutes of Health grant applicants are required to have this biographical sketch document. And it's really meant to demonstrate the magnitude and significance of their scientific advances and the role that they played in those scientific advances. So it helps grant reviewers have a better picture of a researcher's accomplishments and how those accomplishments have impacted scientific discovery. So everybody in the academic world has a biosketch, and it'll be great for you guys to have one too. And so there are 3 major parts to the biosketch. Part A is called the personal statement. Part B is positions, scientific appointments, and honors. And then part C is contributions to science. The whole document can only be 5 pages. So this is just a screenshot of what the document looks like. This is the blank document that you would be able to download. I'm pretty sure Sarah put the link in our calendar invite, but you can also find it right here. So if you were to click on this, and I believe this is the link that's also in the calendar item. Do you guys see this web page now? Okay. So this will take you to the Biosketch format pages, and there's of note. So the Biosketch format has recently been changed, And so it has two tabs, a Biosketch format for if your grant is due before January 24th or after. So right now, the NIH will take either format. I'm going to teach you the new format. Because there's no sense in going and doing the old one and then having to transition it. And at this point, they will take both. So work on the new format when you work on one. So there's two types of biosketches on here. There's the non-fellowship and the fellowship. The fellowship format page is for graduate students, medical students, postdocs. What you want is the non-fellowship biosketch. And there are instructions to the biosketch, and then also there's a sample, and there's also FAQs. And if you click on these, it'll download the Word document, and it will give you, it'll give you this, right? And you can start typing in here your name and start filling this out, okay? You can also download the instructions and the sample. So let me go back here. Am I back in my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's a link to where you go get this. And I've showed you the links that you would want to follow. And then it's pretty straightforward. The instructions are very detailed, and it's just follow the instructions. This top part is just your personnel information. So you put your name, and then as of January 25th, 2022, the NIH is requiring anybody who is on a grant to have an ERA Commons username. And ERA Commons is basically a portal where once we submit a grant, we can see our grant application in there. We can see the status of the review process, like, is it being reviewed? Has it been reviewed? We can go there and get the summary statements for, which are the reviews of our grant once the study section has looked at it. So all of that happens in ERA Commons. The ERA Commons username is actually issued by your academic institution. So KU Med will issue you one, and this form will take you, or this link will take you to the form where you can request an ERA Commons username, and KU Med will process and get you a username. And that name stays with you. It will, once you have it, you'll always have it. Okay, then the position title, something like research advocate. I don't know if, Sarah, you have other suggestions for what type of titles that you've put, or Carol, if what type of titles you've put in here with the position.
We usually just do, patient research advocate.
Yep, okay. And then down here, there's a table for you to fill out your education and training. And it's pretty simple, but you'd be surprised how many faculty don't get this right. So it asks you to start with your baccalaureate degree. So if you have a Bachelor of Science or a Bachelor of Arts or something, then you put that first. And I would be, given what your role is, I would also include any pivot training that you've had here, so that they see that right up here at this table. So that part is pretty straightforward. I think the most important part for you all in your Biosketch is your personal statement. And this is really where you describe your experience and why you're qualified to be a patient research advocate on someone's grant. You can go into the pivot training that you've had, any relevant accomplishments. If you've attended like the KUCC Research Symposium and been a part of the Pivot Day, there's all sorts of things that you can build into this personal statement. And this is really where you tout to yourself. You talk about why you are the best person to serve in this role on this particular grant application. A lot of people ask me if this should be in first person or third person. There's no rules from the NIH, as many formatting and as many rules that they give us. They don't tell us if your personal statement should be in first person or third person. I personally write in first person, but I think if the investigator that you're working with prefers it all in third person, then you just match what they do. But in the end, it really does not matter, and nobody should make you change it one way or the other, because there's officially not a rule on that. When I was doing some research on a patient advocate Biosketch, Komen provides an example, and I have this link here for you guys, and I've also sent the link to Sarah. But this is a personal statement from the example that Komen provides of a patient advocate, where they describe how long they've been an advocate. Maybe if some of you are already paired with an investigator and doing that type of work, then you should talk about that here. Down here in the bottom, some of you may have publications, or you may end up on a publication after you've worked with an investigator. In the personal statement, you can list up to 4 publications. And the NIH does have an opinion about how these citations look. And so that is what this is. This is the format of the citation that goes in the personal statement. I've given you a link here to other NIH formatting guidelines, and they will refer you on to this National Library of Medicine style guide here. But this is an example of just a basic journal citation where you list all of the authors, last name, then initial of the first name, and then you have the title of the journal article, the journal name, the year, the date, this is volume number, and then pages. So depending on, like, if you're part of a journal submission, journals have different formats for these citations. This is what the NIH asks for in their biosketches. So again, the personal statement is probably the one thing that reviewers, when they go and look at a biosketch, they'll look at this personal statement. You write this to describe your experience and why you're qualified to do this. This is a really important part, and only you can write it. You can absolutely get some feedback about what goes in there and maybe what shouldn't go in there. But you definitely, to me, this is like the one thing that all reviewers probably look at. I see there's some questions in the chat.
I was just going to say, yeah, if yours is blank that you don't have any publications, a lot of you starting out aren't going to have a lot of this stuff. So this is probably a very seasoned advocate's, biosketch. I don't want any of you to feel bad if you're like, oh, this is blank, because even mine is pretty blank. I don't have a lot on there. to put down. So just don't feel bad about that, because we're all starting out as new advocates. Some, you know, Cheryl and Peggy have been doing this for quite some time. They may have some of this, but just don't feel like you need to have everything on there.
Absolutely. And so I was just showing you this one because it's an actual example of a patient advocate. And two, you can see that there's a format to the publications if and when you ever have publications to drop in there. And if you get to the point where you have so many publications, you can only put 4 in there. So you put the 4 that are most relevant to the grant application. So your personal statement changes. It can change a lot depending on the grant application. And you know, you may be submitting a grant application or part of a grant application with one faculty member. That personal statement needs to be crafted in your interactions with that person. And then you may be a part of another grant application with a different investigator, and you might not be able to just copy and paste. So there might be just some tiny little tweaks to personalize it towards each grant. And absolutely, this is the old format. This is the old format, but this part
Lisa,
yeah.
Dee has asked if I was printed in a newspaper, could that be used? And I will say that what I have done in filling out, most of the time when you have to fill out a application for being into something, or the personals, or this Biosketch, be creative. So I would say yes, put down the title, the date, and what it was, you know, but we are, and that shows how you're involved in the community. So what we bring is a connection to community and other survivors and co-survivors, and we bring the lived experience. So we need to help people understand what that experience means. So Dee, I would do that. I would include that as one of your publications.
Yes, I agree. And you can definitely include it in part C, which I'll get to here in just a minute. Are there any other questions about the personal statement section?
I have a question. Would you put, okay, so this is for, would you put if you had been a part of a study? Like if you were
Yes.
a participant, like in a study, would that
Yes,
go?
I think that speaks to why you're an expert.
Okay.
You guys are getting it. Keep the questions coming like that.
Connie, did you have a question? I see your hand was up there.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Let me lower my hand. Okay, my question is, if I was in like if there's a magazine and they interviewed me and things like that, and I was in the magazine, my story, my testimony, my story, is that okay?
Yes.
So you're saying that that's fine. I hadn't even thought about that part.
Yep.
Or
And
maybe if it's a something else and they just use my picture or something, what about that? And they're just using my picture and not.
I think it's still part, I mean, why did so they put your picture in there because you were part of some story, right? So I think you could still tell some of that story. And if not in this first part, you might find a better place to describe the whole way that your picture ended up in this story and what the story was about in this part C that I'll explain here in just a minute. But that's a good question. I totally agree with Cheryl. I think you can be very creative here. And
but the citation piece gets tricky when you have a link. And
yeah, so like when you go here, it'll tell you how to let me see this, if it'll come through for me. It'll show you how to cite all sorts of things, newspaper articles, if you were part of a technical report, or book, anything. So it's more than
Okay.
just journals.
It's like writing a college paper, or you cite your sources.
That's right, exactly. And if you were on a story where there's like a website link, you put that website link in there. Yep. Okay, I see another. The bench decides I've done, and I'm doing in the future. Do you, Sarah or Tracy, can you explain that to me?
So
Are you talking
she's
about the
been,
bench?
yeah, our bench to bedsides that Dr. Jensen does, several of our
Okay, bench,
advocates
yeah.
have been featured on those to speak on that.
Yes, I think that you could list that. Yep. And you would put like bench to bedside season, whatever. And Sarah and I could work with Chris Thomas to get the exact thing that you could then put in your, put in the Biosketch.
The other thing is, is there still a, here, positions, scientific appointments and honors? So some of the stuff that you're talking about might be in this section, but you'll just have to, like if your picture's in a newspaper article, you could say something like the title of the newspaper article featured in that article.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's right. So this is part B. And so I think once we get through all of this, there might be some places where you're just not sure where something fits, and we can talk about that, or it never hurts to duplicate things, right? Put it as part of your story, as your personal statement, but then it may just need to be, a factual line listed as an honor. So the second part of the Biosketch is this positions, scientific appointments, and honors. And in the newest format, which I'm asking you guys to use, it lists in reverse chronological order. So in the old format, you started with your oldest faculty appointment. And this one is asking you to start with your current and then work backwards. And again, I think Cheryl was correct. You can be creative here. I think you can list, many of you obviously have other jobs, right? And you can list your current position, like what you do. You can also list, that you're a pivot member and, when that started, and any other honors that you've received, that can all go here. This is the example from the NIH, just to show you, because if you go and look at the Komen grant, you're going to see this section doesn't follow the new guidelines, but you can see what type of information is in there in the Komen example. But you can see, they start with from 2021 to their current positions, and then they work down and they indicate, that they're members of certain societies, they're members of like review committees. If you're a member of an advisory board, or something like that, you could put all of that here. And if you've ever received any honors, you can put that down. Okay, so the third piece, which is also the other piece that most reviewers will look at, is section C, which is called contributions to science. And in this contributions to science section, you can describe up to 5 of your most significant contributions to science. Each one can be no longer than half a page. And then there's all sorts of, they've asked you to, give the historical background and, what the finding was and what was your role in that work. And so this is where, Tanya, you could write about the story. Or Tracy, you could write about how you were part of the bench to bedside. If you were part of a newspaper or a magazine article, you can also talk about your pivot training as being a contributions to science. If you've ever been a part of a rapid reactor panel, or if you're partnered with an investigator, describe those. And they're just little short stories. What are you working on and what was your role in that? And it's all important to showing how you contribute to an investigator's research and what your role is as a patient research advocate. You can include publications here if you have them. And this link to my bibliography, we won't worry about it, it's not required. This is the example from the Komen example, and they even modified it to be contributions to science / advocacy. And you know, this person described how they were part of a clinical trial, and if you go to that link and look, you'll see that she has several contributions to science, and you can see what she describes. But it's a good example to go look at just to see how she might have framed some of her experiences here. So does anybody have any questions about the contributions to science piece? It's really just your place to tell your stories about your different interactions and your different ways that you serve as a patient research advocate.
So Lisa, I have a question. This is Peggy Johnson. I'm not in this category, but we have several people as pivot members who have contributed to science because they've either got a PhD. I'm thinking about Carl, who's a vet. Do they put any of that in there? Because I think they review research probably different than I do, because they've got that background. So do they add that to their NIH Biosketch, even though they're doing it as a patient advocate? I mean, it seems to me it shows experience. So
Yeah,
I'm
so
asking.
yeah, where I would put that type of information, Peggy, is in the personal statement. You know, I have my DVM, I have a scientific eye, and I see different ways to contribute to a research project. Then Peggy, somebody was an accountant for years, right? So you approach research differently with your different backgrounds, but your contributions to science really speak to your role on the grant. And so that, you know, going into and describing like your career here, I would be sure if you do that, that you frame it and link it back to how you ended up on this research project and how your day-to-day activities make you an even better contributor to the scientific project. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. I just know that we have advocates who have great experience on their own, and it may not be directly to cancer, but they've been in research or the medical field. So that's great.
Yep.
Thank
It
you.
certainly frames your experience, and it frames the lens at which you see different research projects. Dee, I see that you have your hand raised.
Yes, I was curious too, because through different surgeries, I guess, I can see how I contributed to science. I'm not sure if this is the kind of information that would go here. Like I had an exploratory type surgery for cadaver nerves to see if they could create sensation again after having a deep flap.
So was that part of a clinical trial?
Not a clinical, I don't think it was a clinical trial. It had already been approved. They were doing it more in Europe, but it wasn't, it was brand new to the States.
I think you absolutely write that story.
Okay, and then like donation of tissue and samples of tumors and things like that. Is that also, would that also be
I
included?
almost think you could write that as one story, right? So,
Okay.
but if you see it as two separate stories, I think that's okay too. But yes, right? So you have had this lived experience and you've been, involved in experimental surgeries. You've donated tissue for research. That type of thing shows why you are a qualified patient research advocate. You have this lived experience. You've gone through some of the things that, we as an investigators think, oh, here, I'm going to have a sample here and a sample here. And we don't always, put like, there's a lady named Dee one day that's going to give me a sample so that I can do my research. And so we don't go that far oftentimes, investigators don't, but that's what you guys are here for. And that's what you're here to teach us to remember, that there's a person behind that sample. So I think those are good stories to write.
Okay, thank you.
What about as a co-survivor? So in those types of examples where it wasn't me personally, but I was, right there through all of those same sorts of experiences, not as the person it being done with or to, but is that applicable still?
Absolutely. You saw it. You saw the questions that were asked or maybe weren't asked. You have an experience through all of that. So, and I think some of what you're talking about, Casey, goes in your personal statement, and it's your story as to why you're now in the role that you're in. But you can certainly use that experience to drive some real changes if that's necessary. Karen, I see your question. You've helped students write. Yeah, absolutely. I would put that in there. And to connect that with your researcher, I think you could even be sure that your investigator, your partnership knows that you have that skill set. Everybody needs an extra set of eyes on their grant applications. So you could maybe help your partner in that. So that's certainly a skill set.
Okay.
Any other questions? Good questions. Okay, so there's one other piece that if you don't have it, you'll be asked to get one. And this is called an ORC ID. ORC stands for Open Researcher and Contributor Identifiers. And it's this unique persistent digital identifiers that is going to be required, well, it already is required by the NIH for everyone to have an ORC ID. And the link for the requirement here is here, and then ORC ID. So you go get this on your own, and then you can actually link your ORC ID and your ERA Commons so that they're together. And I was quite honestly very surprised when the NIH rolled out a new Biosketch format that it didn't have a place for people's ORC IDs. I think eventually we'll see that up in that personnel information where you're listing your name and your ERA Commons. I think you'll eventually see ORC ID up there. But this is important because it helps us track individuals easier. So for example, if you ever go to PubMed, which is a database of scientific research, and if you were to search Jensen and Roy, and even if you went as far to include his middle initial A, you would actually pull papers from two Roy Jensens, one in Florida, one in Kansas. But if you had their ORC ID and the ORC ID was linked to his publications, you could search that ORC ID and get the publications for just the Roy Jensen that you wanted. So org IDs are going to help us eventually get really efficient at, oh, okay, this person had this publication, was on this grant. And so that's that. The career outcomes is probably less an emphasis for you all, but we still want to be able that we can track all your productivity. And so and at this point, it's an NIH requirement. Everyone needs one. So check that out when you get a chance. Okay, so here's, aside from the links that are already in all the slides, there's some other links that I'm giving you. One is a link to just a little more information about an ERA Commons. And then there's my NCBI, which I'll take you there in a minute. And then here's the link to the Komen Biosketch example that I looked. And Cheryl, could we just add the ORC ID as part of our contact information now? There's no space for it on the Biosketch. I haven't seen anybody put it on there yet, but I mean, I guess you could put it on there. I honestly, I wouldn't, but have it, because I think it has to be entered in ERA Commons now. So you'll need it for your ERA Commons account. So I think that's it. The one other thing that I'll take you to is my NCBI. Let me see if this goes. Oh, not, I'm going to retire later. Okay. So this is like PubMed, and I'll just show you mine. This is my NCBI. If you go to PubMed and you search your favorite topic, you'll get all the papers, scientific peer-reviewed papers that are related to that topic. And my NCBI, you can keep your bibliography here. I keep Roy's bibliography up to date. And when you have your bibliography, you get this link, and it's almost like a LinkedIn or Facebook link for academic people. So I actually have this link right here on my Biosketch, but you all will not necessarily have that. But I just wanted to make you aware of what this is, and how you might use it one day. But that is what up here, this link to my bibliography, that's what my NCBI is. So I was just trying to close the circle there for you. That is all I have. You guys, I mean, you've already had really great questions. What